Okay, so notice in this video, now we're dealing with an inequality. So I want to know when the radical function is less than 2. So we're going to graph this on our calculator. I'm going to draw a generic graph too in our screencast here, but we're going to have to solve this, and we have to, one, solve it like we would an equation, but we also have to recognize the domain of this guy. So our domain is going to be affecting our solution, okay? So we know we can't have a negative number. And when I mean negative number, we have no negative number in the square root. So I have to consider two separate situations. I have to consider, so case 1, we have to be less than 2, okay? Case 2, the radical has to be greater than or equal to 0, or what's inside has to be greater than or equal to 0. So for case 1, I'm just going to solve. Okay? For case 2, I'm going to look at the domain. Okay? So let's do both cases. So the first case is I'm just going to go ahead and solve, and that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides, and I get x plus 1 is less than 4. Subtract 1, x is less than 3. So any number less than 3 is going to give me a value that's going to end up being less than 2. So let's put in 3. So here's my check. Okay, and notice there's no equality symbol here. Is the square root of 4 less than 2? No, but if I put in a number less than 3, will it end up being less than 2? So for example, let's put in 0. So that's a number less than 3, right? So the square root, the square root of 0 plus 1, is that less than 2? The square root of 1 is less than 2. Yeah, that's correct. Okay, so that works. Now let's talk about our domain for a second. Let's pick any number less than 3. I'm going to pick negative 5. What happens when x is equal to negative 5? So this is a part of the domain idea. So if I plug in a number like negative 5, is that less than 2? Well, what's the square root of negative 4? Well, the square root of negative 4 is 2i. Well, that doesn't work because we're dealing with imaginary, comparing it to a real, and we can't do that. So when we're dealing with certain numbers that are going to produce a negative underneath the radical, we can't consider those. So what I have to do is I have to look at the domain. So I have this piece right here, and then with the domain, I need to say, well, x plus 1, what's inside the radical, has to be greater than or equal to 0. So that means I have to solve this, and x has to be greater than or equal to negative 1. So I have these two situations that I have to combine. Okay? So my solution is going to be when x is greater than or equal to negative 1, but less than 3. Those are the only x values that will satisfy the inequality. So I'm going to draw a real quick graph, and it's going to be pretty basic, but we'll have the calculator to show that also on the next video. So I'm just going to draw my grid, and my first one is going to be the x plus 1. So I have two functions. I have x plus 1 in red. Actually, we'll change that to black because the axis is red. So I have x plus 1 in black, and then in blue, I'm going to have 2. Okay? So these are my two graphs. So let's graph y is equal to 2 first. That's going to be this horizontal line. Okay, and then the black one, we know we shift to the left, and I know I'm going to kind of go like that. Okay. I want to know when we are going to be less than 2. So at this point right here, the black graph is less than 2, right? So at this point right here, which is going to be 3, okay, we're actually less than 2, or equal to. We can't equal, so it would be an open circle. But notice down here, the graph stops. It is less than the blue line, but there's nothing here, so there's no graph, so we don't include any of that. And that's what we were talking about with the domain. So the graph only exists from this point, or excuse me, the domain only exists from this point to this point. These are the only solutions that work. And this value right here is -1. So between, or when x is between these two numbers, right here, these are the only values that are going to be less than 2 and also within our domain because we're dealing with a radical function.